So welcome everyone to this Wednesday webinar. This is one of our monthly webinars. We're hosting a webinar every third week of the month. And today I'm here with my co-host, my acupuncturist, female health specialist. But that's not the topic we're going to talk about today. Today is something that is as important, and that is men's health. And we're really glad to see so many people on, also men, as we talked about before we started this recording, that it's football on tonight. I have Mbappe on the background here, just so you know, so we're supported. But over to you, because Jackie, we have a special guest tonight.
We do. So we have Dr. Colin Robertson, which I'm sure most of you know. He is Enzino's Chief Product Officer. He is a qualified nutritionist, published author, and he holds a PhD in exercise physiology. He firmly believes that everyone, regardless of personal circumstance, has the right to absolute best support and guidance when it comes to making positive lifestyle changes. One of my favorite things about Colin is, though, he can make the science understandable. I haven't known anyone walk away from him delivering information that the average person can't take something from. So I'm very excited to hear about this. And I'm also really pleased with doing men's health because it seems to be a neglected part. So if we can drill down on that, it's wonderful. Colin, take it away.
Thanks very much. And good evening, everybody. I'd imagine everyone is in a part of the world where it is evening, even if you're in Europe and you're ahead of us. So I'm always reluctant to listen to these introductions because it big things up too much, if I'm honest with you. I think less is more. In future, folks, if you invite me on a talk and I show up, just go, here he is. He might have something interesting to say. But what I do agree with is this notion of men's health. And, you know, as someone who's confident and still traditionally happy with the pronoun of man, male, he, I'm comfortable with whatever you call me, to be honest with you. It has been a difficult issue, and I've actually done a lot of work in this space over the years, and largely because I've worked with what is typically characterized as type A personality males. So people, men who are working in high performance, so hugely competitively driven, borderline egocentric. I've worked with a lot of specialized elite military forces here in the UK and some abroad. And within all of these contexts, and particularly somebody who's got such a background in sports like rugby and martial arts and MMA and even in football, you know, you get this real male cosmos. Apologies here because something has popped up on my screen. Let me just get rid of it. There we go. You get this male cosmos of an attitude of what it is to be male. And one of those things has been this notion of, you know, kind of man up, and that you just deal with it and you don't talk about your problems. And problems, this is a major one, problems typically happen to other people. Now what we're dealing with is a very different set of circumstances in the 21st century, because now we're dealing with men from the age of mid-20s, certainly into the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and above, who are having to come to terms with their mortality and also having to come to terms with the life decisions they've made. And much of this talk, I'm going to bring a presentation deck up in a moment, because I'm going to really anchor this around really the impact of omega-3 on certain parameters that relate to men's health. And the reason why I've chosen that line particularly is because when I was invited to do this, it was a case of, well, let's have a look at prostate, and let's have a look at testosterone, and let's have a look at mental health. And like, these are all huge areas. They're all vast areas. And within each and every single one of these, there are two common denominators, which actually, as we go through the slides, are what I'll come to at the very end, which is the nutritional profile of your diet. So the choices that you make most often, and your level of physical activity and exercise. These are huge implicators, and I could actually speak a lot from experience and as much as from expertise with regards to why I feel we're in the situation we're in now, whereby there is a men's health crisis going on. because one, men are reluctant to go to the doctors and report things. They report things late. Two, when it comes to those kind of dietary choices and lifestyle modifications, men are second to women. Look at any statistic now. And in fact, 2 weeks ago, I was in London. I was hosting a huge a national fitness event where we were looking at the latest fitness industry data, hard data captured. And what do we see year on year? We see an increased participation of females when it comes to exercise, physical activity. We see an increased participation of females when it comes to engaging in positive food choices. And all the while, we see a decrease in men. At the same time, we see this increased profile of what we would typically define as male disorders. And so what we're going to look at tonight really is to pick a line through this. And the line I want to pick is simply omega-3, its impact with regards to men's fertility, which is certainly a conversation that doesn't get read enough. When we look at that in the context of testosterone production for men, which, as I'm sure you'll have all seen, I'm sure your social media feeds have been dominated by every type of supplementation that promises to give you testosterone back. And we're also going to look at this in the context not just of mental health, which itself is a broad term, but mental function. Because what often doesn't get discussed enough is the relationship between cognitive function and mental health. And mental health itself, the minute you mention mental health, somebody immediately assumes the negative. So they start to assume a person who is in some kind of dire situation, where there is a compromise to their level of happiness, or that they are dealing with depression and anxiety. And this is the reality of why we discuss it that way, is because we discuss it when it becomes a problem. But there are actually more aspects to what we would constitute as mental health than just depression and anxiety. Some of this is a sense of empowerment, whether or not a person feels that they can cognitively engage meaningfully in the world. We live in an age of fast information. Information's at hand, but when you consider that the average reading age across the UK is 9, and remember that's a propped up reading age. When you consider the average reading age is 9, and when it comes to men, it's slightly less than that, what you got to start to focus on is that when we look at the broadest context of mental health, we're actually talking about a line that goes all the way back to cognitive function, mental well-being, literally with regards to the matter of your brain. So in a moment, I'll bring up the slides to keep me on track, if nothing else. We're almost quarter past the hour. There's a lot to get through. Will I cover every single one in depth? No, but I will give you some key references to some of the most recent published research. And I'm going to try and, with a light of touch, hit on the key concepts and how they fit within the specific areas, okay? Before I even commence, though, there is a direct relationship between male reproduction, so like our fertility health, and our testosterone production. They are intertwined. When we look at the general health and state of the reproductive system, we can correlate that neatly towards factors that relate to testosterone production, and we can relate that neatly actually as well towards aspects of risk of the development of non-communicable diseases. I would imagine most people have heard the term menopause. And there's a casual phrase that gets used now, and it's a shame because it's always the same when it's men, which is called manpause or menopause. And people laugh about it and go, yeah, whatever. But the fact is it's a reality. So menopause is a reality. And the reason why we know it's a reality is because we can draw lines now, firm parameters that are age-related, whereby a fundamental change happens within the male with regards to their reproductive system, the impact that has on testosterone, and the impact that has when there is a compromise to testosterone production on their mental health and well-being, their physical activity, their exercise, and their general state of well-being and their metabolic health. So the term creates a little bit of a laugh because it's similar to a more established term. But the reality is we need to stop laughing about it because it's very much a hard and fast physiological, pathological reality. Maybe we need to give it a different name in order for it to not be joked about anymore. But the reality is it's a very real thing. And so as we go through this now, I want you to look at all the things through the notion of a preventative lens, not curative. The idea with everything we do is that we can make better informed dietary changes, lifestyle changes that put us firmly in the preventative category, so we can prevent these things. Sometimes I try to encourage people that the best form of prevention is delay. If we recognize to a certain extent that certain things or certain attributes have a level of inevitability, if we can delay them, offset them to much, much later in life, that enhances our general quality of life. So there are certain aspects of this that there are. And the reason why is because we're mortal. I don't know if you know this, but it's strongly correlated and determined that the maximum a human could ever live for is 122 years. That's kind of like our longest, and it could get to a time when more people are living to that age, but it won't come on its own. And in fact, some of the things that we are seeing now that are common with old age are more common because more of us are reaching old age. And this is certainly true with regards to some of these factors that relate to men's health. But before I bring the slide deck up, the other thing I want you to all think of, particularly you men who are on the call, because you're all individuals and you're all autonomous and you have to make choices for yourself, is that quality of diet is the single biggest determinant of your overall health. Quality of your diet, the choices you make, are the single biggest determinant over your reproductive health, how your testosterone levels are managed and fluctuate, and your mental health and well-being. Fact. So bear that in mind as we go through some of the key aspects of what I'd like to really just discuss and raise as key points for your consideration. So, and this was actually modified literally moments before the talk began because I became aware of a research paper that was published today. So that's how fresh this is. So one of the publications that's made reference to was today. We'll get to it in a few slides, and it's actually the single largest study of its type ever to be conducted by the University of Oxford, and the findings of it are quite revealing. So, and it's the link between metabolic health and cognitive function, and the role this plays with regards to our general mental well-being. So, is everyone with me so far? Good. I can see about 6 people. They're all nodding. That'll do for me. Here we go. So, like I said, I wanted to do this through the power of omega-3. Why? Why didn't I pick something like vitamin C, vitamin D? Why didn't I go to B12 or zinc? Because they all play a part. Of course, they all play a part. However, the reason why I've picked omega-3 in particular is because, one, it's one of the most common deficiencies. 2, when we look at it from a biochemical perspective, it facilitates one of the 2 common pathways. So we have the polyunsaturated fatty acids pathway, and we have the antioxidant, the polyphenol pathway. And we know that actually either or of these, if they are well maintained and intact, can carry us a long way. And this explains geographical variation with regards to dietary behaviors. Because sometimes a person like me will be asked, well, what about this part of the world that doesn't get a lot of omega-3 either, but they seem to be really healthy. And in fact, they can even sometimes qualify as a blue zone. When you draw your attention and you examine those areas, what you'll find is that they super compensate with the polyphenol pathway. So the antioxidant pathway is delivered as a biochemical modulator, and that's why they can prop up and maintain really good standards of health. Likewise, there are parts of the world geographically that have very little polyphenol, but are dominated by a prevalence of omega-3. And again, have very, very good, well-substantiated health outcomes without the manifestation of the polyphenol pathway. And why? Because it's a great compensatory mechanism in isolation. But the single best way is to address them both, is the reality. And that's why the overall nutrient profile of your diet is so important. A diet that is rich in antioxidants, good sources of dietary fibers, high sources of vitamin C, all of these things are important. But I would argue that whilst I do stand behind intelligent supplementation in those areas, more often than not, they're easier to address. The one that's becoming more and more of a challenge for people as each year and decade goes by is the omega-3 equation. And don't just take my word for that. All the epidemiology supports this. We are seeing less and less of a prevalence of omega-3 in the diet year on year. And this has been going on now for over 50 years. And when that happens, what comes with it is a certain amount of poor consequences. More importantly, when you consider the omega-3 pathway, and I describe some of the situations that we're going to consider now and how effectively they can be addressed by ensuring you have a sufficient amount of omega-3, it actually becomes a really easy strategy. You can put a lot right by doing something really simple and being consistent in your behavior. So that's why I decided to take that route today. And also because in such limited time, I can't possibly discuss it all. And if someone said to me, what's your top tip? I'd say, do this. Like, just do this. And you're going to see and experience a huge improvement. So let's get into male reproduction. Men don't like talking about it, not in a serious way anyway, but let's do it anyway. First of all, we have a term that's called sperm motility. And this is the ability of our sperm to move. And somewhat like our societies, and like the vast majority of our men, particularly here in the UK, a lot of sperm has become very, very lazy and doesn't move a lot. So sedentary behavior of the vessel, of the human, seems to be reflected by the sperm itself. And there are lots of things that impact on this. Smoking impacts on it. Sedentary lifestyle has a huge impact on it. Overall diet quality has a huge impact on it. And what we know is that certain nutrient deficiencies compromise sperm motility. And I'm going to keep this simple. And some of you may already know. I'm sure you do. Everyone gets taught biology 101 when they're at school. Not a lot's changed. We've known this for a long time. But if you imagine at the point of ejaculation, those sperm are unleashed, and it is their job to swim to and reach the fertile egg. Their job is to get there. It's the first race. Well done, you all won. So the first job is to get there, win the race, fertilize the egg, and there we go. But where there is poor sperm motility, then what you can get are either sperm that literally go the wrong way or don't have sufficient energy to cover the distance. They just run out. They just can't make the distance. So it's poor sperm movement. The other factor that's really common when it comes to male reproduction is low numbers. So the overall sperm count. Here you see on the screen here is data from the Mayo Clinic from 2024, and it's a definition of what is like within a normal range and what's low. So normal sperm densities range from 15 million to greater than 200 million. So it's a vast range per milliliter of semen. You're considered to have low sperm if you're fewer than 15 million, okay? And this again is directly impacted by your levels of activity, whether or not you spend too much time sedentary, the overall quality of your diet. All of these things have an impact on it, but also omega-3 plays a huge role with regards to overall sperm quality as well as sperm motility. So sperm motility and concentration. There's been several meta-analyses that have looked at this, and on each of these where I make reference to specific research, I've included the references below. So please feel free to read these at your own time and read them in full. They're all widely available. But there has been numerous studies that has looked at targeted supplementation as a treatment pathway. Now, right at the start of this talk, I said that we were going to discuss this in a preventative way, and that's where I prefer to be. I'm far more comfortable talking about preventative health. However, whenever we look at omega-3, I'm going to just leap to the side a second. You will always see it correlated to treatment interventions, whether that's cardiovascular, whether that's in certain types and conditions of cancer, whether that can be something with regards to metabolic dysfunction, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, these kind of things. And you see it here as well. And in this instance, this meta-analysis was considering people who had just used omega-3 as a treatment intervention with regards to sperm motility. And the results were quite significant. So just by this, in comparison to placebo itself, we saw a marked increase in sperm motility to the extent that it is classified as functional. actively functional just through targeted omega-3 supplements. And then second to that, similarly, when it comes to quality, we see that omega-3 supplements and dietary intake of omega-3 can improve sperm semen quality parameters in infertile men. So again, this is a treatment modality. So this is whereby you are considering two groups who are reported as having low motility, having low quality, and with a targeted approach of omega-3 to correct, we're seeing quite pronounced and positive results. Therefore, then it's our task is to switch this into a preventative mode and consider, well, don't wait for the problem, just recognize that this is keenly implicated in the situation and have an omega-3 strategy as you lead up. We are at an interesting place in the world, and I'll explain why. Because health boards around the world, more and more now, when a woman goes to the clinic and expresses the fact that they intend to try for a child, that that's their intention, they are recommending omega-3 supplementation, both with regards to the fertility and then the early development of the child. And yet, it's almost as though everything we've known about genetics gets forgotten at that point. Because literally, I don't know how well you all know this, but literally, men, what you ate within the 48 hours before your partner conceived influences the genetic material of that child. Literally. That's how profound the impact is. So when you consider your fertile status, when you consider your overall metabolic health and the genetic code that you're about to pass on, all of your contemplation when trying for a child should be focused on how you could optimize your genetic material. How can you best look after your state of well-being and health? Because going right back to biology 101, you're about to replicate. That's what we do. We pass over a cell, the cell divides and duplicates, and before you know it, there's 37 trillion of them, and we call it a human. And it comes from that moment of conception. What you pass on is a cell that contains a certain amount of genetic material, and it's highly influenced by who and what you are and the choices you've made up until that point. There have been a number of observational studies that have looked at different children from the same parents born with certain year gaps between them and considered the dietary and activity behaviors of the parent and how that's been manifested and reflected in the child. And if more people had more access to these studies, they would realize that the choices they make are directly influencing the type of child they'll have. That never do you receive a carbon copy. And what comes next is directly derivative of how you've been managing yourself. So when it comes to the motility, when it comes to the quality, omega-3 plays a fundamental role in ensuring both are optimized. But don't take your eye off the ball, the fact that every other choice you make, your alcohol consumption, your smoking type of habits, and certainly the overall quality of your diet. Because remember, and anyone who's listened to me before, I would be amazed if you haven't heard me talk about epigenetics. Remember, you are passing on a parcel of genetic material that is hugely influenced by who and what you are at that moment of conception. And so if you want to optimize the potential for what that child can be, then you would consider these kind of aspects before literally taking the plunge. So this takes us through two key fundamental aspects of omega-3 and men's reproductive health. From there, we go from testicular health and testosterone production, because as I'm sure you all know, even if you don't know much about anatomy and physiology, but the testicles are heavily implicated in the production of testosterone. And we see again, because what I want you to think of is you can read all this if you want, I can read it to you, but I can actually skip through this and make it really, really simple. If you can optimize the sexual reproduction system, then you are optimizing the testosterone production system. That's as simple as it gets. The two are so directly intertwined. There's a lot of concern now, and this is why there's a lot of product in the space with regards to the decline, the rapid decline of testosterone in males as they reach certain points in life. And this has huge implications with regards to libido, has huge implications with regards to the levels of activity that they engage in, This is misinterpreted as a lack of motivation because fatigue can be considered to be a barrier to participation. Less likely to walk more often, less likely to join a gym, take part in a class, all these kind of things that we're trying to encourage people to do all the time. And people have done a lot of work. There's been a lot of epidemiology that has associated the decline of testosterone, which is wrongly, in my opinion, classified as age-related, or it's put it this way, it's classified as age-related far too soon, and how people activate and manage themselves throughout. The reality is that, and I'm sure you know this, if cared for, male reproductive capacity is far greater than women's. You know, when once a woman has gone through the menopause, that's the end of their reproductive capacity, by and large, with some rare exceptions to that rule. For the male, reproductive capacity is pretty much cradle to the grave. It's pretty much cradle to the grave if you are generally keeping yourself active and well and making better food choices than poor ones and doing a little bit of self-care. But the reality we have now and what we're seeing all across the world is huge declines in testosterone. We're seeing a reality all across the world with reference to those factors I've just been talking about. And this relates itself to dietary choices and lifestyle behavioral factors. So we see that omega-3 supplementation has a positive impact on testosterone production. And I know that there are so many people out there now who are creating products to stimulate the production of testosterone. And as the CPO of a nutrition supplement company, I've looked at it. I've looked at the research and thought, can we do something in that space to help? And every time I look at that research, I realize that we already are. We're already operating in that space. We just don't talk about it enough because we have the single most powerful and proven omega-3 supplement in the world. And that alone has an untold capacity to positively influence your testosterone production. So the reality is, and this is a conversation we have a lot at Zinzino, we should just have different labels on the bottle, because people will say, I'm interested in sport. What does it do for sport? So we should have a black one, a black label, looks really cool. And we go, yeah, it's sport omega-3, but it's the same product. And then we should have one, I don't know, that's got nice different kind of molecules on it. We go, yeah, that's the testosterone omega-3, but it's all the same. Because it's what the omega-3 does that makes a difference. And what motivates the person is why they want it. But also, if we start to look at this, and this isn't discussed enough at all amongst men, there's such a naivety amongst this. And I'm going to rock your world now, man, because women actually have more testosterone than us. It's just that it's balanced out better with the progesterone and estrogen. And so as a total, they have more than we do. But we do this big testosterone, manly testosterone. They got way more than us. But we have more as a dominant hormone. That's the reality of it. And then hormones and total amounts versus ratios is really important in biology. And so when you start to look at people who've taken fish oil supplements, the levels of free testosterone, which is what we want, are encouraged to increase. And then this changes the ratio of the luteinizing hormone, the LH ratio, and the folliculator stimulating hormone. These are typically conversations we have about women's health. But guess what, man? It relates to all of us too. And so when we start to positively influence these ratios, then what we have is a more dominant pathway for testosterone, which gives us that drive, gives us our libido back, makes us want to go for a run, fight a bear, and do all that stuff that men are attributed to trying to do, allegedly. I don't see much of it where I live. But that's the general principle. That's the general rule of it. It's by subtle changes to the ratio. And what happens is, and it's almost as though nature and our genes kind of knew we'd mess this up, if I'm honest with you. And the more you look into this, and the more you look into the anthropology of humans, and when you start to look at some of the molecular science around aging, you start to realize that our bodies knew, or evolution knew, we'd be stupid. And so early on, it gave us so much of everything to carry us through that initial reproductive phase, thinking we're more likely to have them then. What's happened, though, is a big societal change. So now more often than not, people are starting to plan and have families mid to late 30s. That's becoming more and more of a common. I don't know if you know this, but the family planning phase is actually going more towards the top end. Previously, it was late teenage and early and mid 20s and up to the 30s. And what's happened now is it's gravitated this way at the same time that a person, an individual, has had decade upon decade of poor dietary choices, less physical activity, less exercise, been more subject to certain types of deficiencies. And so what you've got here now is a problem, because earlier on, that genetic material and that drive was so abundant, it kind of super compensated for it. It's interesting when you look at it on these terms. And so another thing that is almost confusing the situation, particularly for males, is that in the morning, when you wake up, you have the most testosterone. It's the amplitude of the curve is highest. You have the most testosterone. But the reality is that the system can't use it very well because it saturates the system and the receptor. And so what we see is that by the time testosterone starts to back off, which is around about 6 p.m., 7 p.m., our sensitivity to testosterone peaks. And that's where less is more. And so the timing at this point is critical. So we have this optimal window. And this is why much of my research, if you ever go and read what's been published in the peer review, has considered this in the context of sports performance. And in fact, just a few years ago, we wrote the consensus paper for the British Medical Journal on all of this, sleep in the athlete and these types of implications with regards to ratios of testosterone, sensitivity and availability. And so we've had these mechanisms, underlying mechanisms, that have almost misled us. They've given us a false confidence. And then what happens is this huge societal shift where people aren't taking advantage of their testosterone availability. They're not active. They're not creating the pumps that drive the system. They do less and less. Their muscle mass withers. They have less muscle mass as they get older. We call this sarcopenia, but it's actually more related to what you do than your age. So there's less of a pump, there's less of a drive, there's less of a causality. And then we talk about decade 1, decade 2, decade 3 of nutritional deprivation. And you've created the perfect circumstances now for testosterone to be low, which in itself is implicated or the cause of poor reproductive health. So the two are integrated. The two are integrated, but so too is the solution. And so, and this third study is actually really quite interesting because, as you'll all be aware, we are dealing with a world that is becoming ever more overweight and obese. And in fact, just a couple of months ago, the latest epidemiology, latest publication announced that we now have over 1 billion people in the world who are obese, classified as obese. Maybe you don't realize how startling that is, but for the first time in history, we have more people who are obese, so struggling with excessive consumption of food, than there are starving. There are less than 900,000 people to be estimated to be starving or, suffering from poor nutrition. What we have now is excessive poor nutrition. So more people obese than there are starving. And so we have to look at the implications of that from a health point of view, because that's the reality of the world. We have to look at that and go, this is the problem we need to face. And again, when we looked at the effect of omega-3 supplementation on testosterone levels with men who were overweight or obese, 860 mg, what we saw was in over just a 12-week period, we saw an increased total testosterone for those against those who took a placebo. That might lead you to think, well, so what? What does that mean? What that means is that you have a person who has the physiological drive to now engage more meaningfully in physical activity and exercise. One of the things that has really come to worry me or concern me most in the modern era is this attitude towards people who are overweight or obese, and this notion that, well, you should just do something. You should just be active and you've got to toughen up. It's not that simple. They are not physiologically, metabolically primed to do that type of activity. There is so much that is happening from a pathophysiological point of view when a person becomes overweight and obese that you can't just say, well, just do 20 press-ups. It's just really not that easy. What you have to do is prime the system to enable them to participate, which in itself then will be a catalyst for other types of adaptation. And what we see here is that through a strategy of omega-3 supplementation, we can prompt and stimulate significant amounts of testosterone amongst those populations, which therefore enables them and gives them an opportunity to do more. So it's powerful, and it's also it's relatively passive, because you're either going to do this through dietary modification, best of luck, or you're going to do this through intelligent supplementation, which is really, really simple and proven to be effective. So we see here now we've gone from reproductive health directly into, because it's highly correlated, into our testosterone production. We know that if omega-3 is at the right level, we're in a better place for testosterone production. And we know that if we have a testosterone issue, that omega-3 can actually prompt a return to normality. So again, we don't need to go and look at crazy named things and plants from the Amazon forest. We can just top up with omega-3 and make a positive impact on what it is we're trying to achieve. And we should. So I'm going to digress now. There's a part of me, like, you have the angel and the devil on your shoulder, and the angel is saying, no, Col, just go on to the next slide and talk about the stuff you planned. But the devil on the other shoulder is going, no, Col, you've got nearly 200 people listening to you, so have a moment to take a rant. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to listen to the devil, not the first time in life. But here's the reality, folks, is accountability and discipline. Seriously, don't worry about vitamin D. Just think about D, discipline. And this notion that you have to start taking the hard yards. Just do the things that you need to do to empower better quality of life. Sometimes, and I'm not belittling it, that hard yard is to be consistent with your supplementation. And not to be expecting a miracle in 2 days, but to go, okay, I've spent a long period of my life not doing things great. Now I'm going to invest some meaningful time to putting that right, and be realistic with your expectations and be disciplined and take it step by step and be consistent and see it through. Likewise with your physical activity and your exercise, 100%. I don't care who you are on here, you should be doing some. It doesn't matter what your situation is. Doing some movement is going to help at a level that is appropriate for you. That is a must, and that's a certifiable guarantee. That's essential to consider that. But it will always help, and then start to look at how that can be progressed and where you can take that. And that comes down to that, just owning it, being disciplined and being consistent. You are the outcome of the things that you do most often, and consistency is key. So when it comes to your omega-3, it's about saying, right, it's not about an intervention. It's not about saying, okay, this will fix me. It's about going, no, this is an essential nutrient. It's implicated in so many fundamental aspects of who and what I am. So I tell you what, I'm going to keep this up. This is going to be with me now for the duration of the ride. That's the way to view these things. I don't like to discuss cancer when it comes to supplements, but I'm going to. But I'm going to do so swiftly, because we're going to look at it in the context of prostate cancer, which has a huge impact on males, as I'm sure you'll all know. And cancer itself, I was actually on a meeting this afternoon with Paul Clayton, Dr. Paul Clayton, who I'm aware some of you will know. And Paul and I were discussing this because we agree and we disagree on lots of things. But one of the things that we agree on is that cancer is a lazy term, because cancer itself is an umbrella term for way over 300 different types of pathology. But they do have a commonality with regards to that cellular proliferation and where cellular turnover gets out of control. And so within that, there's been such vast amounts of research and exploration to see what works when. What does a deficiency lead to? What can be addressed by the correction of a deficiency? What are effective treatment methods? And back in 2014, and if you Google omega-3 and prostate cancer, you'll find this first. And I'll explain why. Back in 2014, there was a paper published that correlated omega-3 with an increased risk of prostate cancer. And it was sensational, and it was sensationalized, and it created headlines all over the world. And that's the reason why, if you Google prostate cancer and omega-3, you'll find all that stuff first, because it was so cited. It became the fuel for such a debate and so many articles to go, wow, we've all been told omega-3 is great, but look at this article. It's one of those instances where it created a lot of sensation and it created a lot of talk, but in reality, the paper wasn't very good. The hardcore scientific metrics of the paper were a little bit flawed. It was more observational than it was mechanistic. And most of the work that has been concluded and pursued ever since has shown decidedly different outcomes. Now, I don't know if you know this, but Nature is one of the highest impact peer-reviewed scientific articles in the world. If it's been published in Nature or it's been published in the Lancet, it's pretty much the best of the best who are having the conversation and conducting the research. This article from 2023, which was published in Nature, actually says when they looked at preclinical findings that looked at a rationale for clinical trials, encouraged it. It showed very positive outcomes with regards to omega-3 and the reduction of risk, and also how it enhanced treatment pathways for people who are dealing with prostate cancer. And this was through the inhibition of GPR120 and functional N2 like macrophages. So there's a very hard, clearly definable biochemical physiological pathway at play, which is the interaction of omega-3 on certain types of immunological response when it comes to compensating or addressing or preventing prostate cancer. All of that research that is really rich shows that omega-3 plays a positive role, both in reducing risk and actually as a part of an effective treatment pathway. As with any time we discuss anything cancer related, you should speak to your oncologist. If you know somebody who's undergoing any type of treatment, they should speak to their oncologist. We should be really careful with what guidelines and recommendations we give them. But the reality is that the research in that area is really, really encouraging. I want to take you all the way back and away from that condition now. And I want you to purely think about this in the context of preventative health. When we see how highly correlated omega-3 is in the prevention of non-communicable diseases, you would have to be either willfully ignorant or totally crazy to ignore the role it plays and still debate whether or not it's something you need to address. It's as simple as that. The argument and the debate of, well, you can do it with this other pathway, the polyphenol pathway, the antioxidant pathway that I described at the start, is a defunct argument because you can do both. And more often than not, through personal experience, when people come back at me with this, well, you can do the polyphenol pathway, and I say, really? And what do you do? They start to go, blip, have olive oil on a salad once in a while, and I ate some kale last week. Brilliant. So you're not proactive in that either. It's just a lazy, backhanded comment, which is to dismiss something that is actually really, really important. We should address both pathways, but the reality is this is the more difficult one for most people to address. And one of the things that we don't discuss enough is the omega-3 pathway. When we look at the polyunsaturated, the essential fatty acid pathway, it's really, really quick. It's really, really quick. So we can typically measure and detect the transformation of index and ratio within 120 days, which is profound. And so when we're trying to reorientate someone's nutritional health status, this is a really powerful way to go about it. But it's also why, when we consider the points we've raised so far, maybe we should just market it differently. Maybe we need to do this in a different color bottle that is more male-centric so that men go, yes, that's a blokey type of product, and I'm going to drink that in front of all my friends just to get them to be more serious and switched on about it. Don't know, but I do wonder what the limitation is, given all the evidence that there is available to promote it. So, here we go. This was published today. So you can't tell anyone that you come to a talk and it's not the latest evidence that we're discussing. And it's only because people like me are constantly looking at research articles that it can be this fresh. So, metabolic health. I'm obsessed with metabolic health at the moment. And that's because, I don't know if you're aware of this, but recent data from the States reported that it's less than 7% of people living in North America now have what would be described as or qualified as good metabolic health. So beyond 93% of North Americans now are in a state of poor metabolic health. And you might go, well, Col, we're living in the UK or Belgium or Netherlands or France, wherever you are from tonight. Why do I care about that? Let me tell you something that I've learned in the 30 years that I've been working in health and fitness. What happens there comes here. It used to take longer. There was a time when, we used to say it takes 10 years. It never did in my timeline. If I'm honest with you, it never took 10 years. It was always more like 5 or 6. Now it's more like 2 or 3. That's the reality. So what we see over there is essentially a warning of what's going to come here. And the early signs are already here. And so this is the largest ever study of its kind. It's been conducted by the University of Oxford. This was a publication that literally came out today. And what we've looked at is poor metabolic health, which is commonly referred to as metabolic syndrome, and how that can be quantified. Things like your HDL and versus your LDL, high blood sugar, lower levels of those HDL, a large waist circumference. So a lot of these things, you can see them there on the screen, that qualify and quantify what more poor metabolic health is. But let's delve into the brain. So we see a lower total brain volume and lower grey matter volume, which is responsible for processing information in the brain. Now, this is why you should be concerned. Because have you ever had this conversation? And I have got 3 children, and they're paying attention and looking at the world. And have you ever had this conversation with a friend or with a child or with someone where you will encounter someone who is what we call, unfortunately, in the super obese category? And they'll ask the obvious question. How can that happen to a person? And the reason why that can happen to a person is because it has such deep-rooted psychological component to this. And we know, and there is so much information available with regards to the manifest changes to cognitive function, to mental health and well-being, and they literally correlate with the deterioration of that condition. So literally, to be crude, and I mean this with no offense, the bigger we get, the more of a cognitive deterioration there is. And so we become less and less enabled and empowered to be able to make a positive change. Nobody wants to be like that. Nobody at all. And that's one of the reasons why I get quite defensive of people who are living with obesity, because it can be categorized as a disease state. I get very defensive over it because we would never, ever allow anybody to ridicule anybody with any other type of non-communicable disease. But it seems like it's a free market when it comes to obesity, and it's wrong. It contributes nothing positive to addressing the situation. But what we see here in the largest study of its kind is that these cognitive deficits, this deterioration literally in the size of the brain, when we start to look at the neurological pathways that are laid down, when we start to look at things like ability to recall, to retain information, they're all compromised. They are all compromised. Even processing, the capacity to make decisions quickly. So reactivity times, all of this is compromised over time with regards to poor metabolic health. And so you may be thinking, what's that got to do with mental health? It's got everything to do with mental health, because these are all the landmark factors that start to compromise a person's capacity to think optimistically, to think with any level of kind of positivity. This is the wide open door to depression, to anxiety, to feelings of self-loathing, which in turn can lead to other catastrophic events and types of behaviors. So it's important that we look at this through a very metric-driven, quantifiable stance. Because when we talk about general things like happiness and well-being and satisfaction, they're really subjective. Someone asked me just recently, are you happy? And my response is always the same. It's been the same for 30 years. I find happiness in every day. But do I live in a constant state of happiness? No. And I don't believe anybody does. But I'm happy in the morning when I make porridge. I'm happy when I stop and go in the garden and have a nice cup of coffee. I'm happy when I go for a run. But do I live in a constant state of happiness? I think that's ridiculous. But what happens here is when I look at all the things that make me happy, they are typically proactively driven engagements. It's either a choice of a place to be or a choice of a thing to do. And nothing makes me more happy than going for a run. So when you start to look at these kind of compromises, this is a compromise to learning, this is a compromise to engagement with the world, this is a compromise to self-development, self-actualization. All of this is lessening a person's quality of life, which in turn will exacerbate feelings of loneliness, anxiety, depression, and desperation. So we really do need to switch on to this, because if we're going to start to address this mental health crisis, which is the pandemic before the pandemic, then we need to start to get into the hard facts of the matter. Do people need to be counselled? Of course they do. Do people need support? Of course they do. But they also need to look at what they can drive from a psychophysiological point of view and what can be corrected. And guess what? Omega-3 plays a huge part in managing your metabolic health, but as does every other type of nutrients in your diet. I realize we've got like 3 minutes to the hour. I can't fit into 2 minutes a talk about all the other essential vitamins and minerals. But what I will say is that whenever you look at your diet, whenever you look at the choice you're about to make, the question that should be firmly in your mind 80% of the time is, what nutrients will be derived from this choice I'm about to make? 20% is that discrepancy. Just have something for the joy of it. Life is short. If you want to have a chocolate bar once in a while, go for it and don't feel bad. But 80% of your assessment of food, your food choices, your meal preparation should be about what nutrients do these derive, because the body communicates at a biochemical level with nutrients. When you start to look at how the body responds in a normative state with regards to its endocrine function, its immunological function in a normative state, after exercise, after activity, after a stressful day, when you're dealing with a cough, a cold, a virus, what we trace through are biochemical pathways that rely on the presence of things like vitamin D, vitamin C, B12, omegas. All of these things are implicated. Where there's a deficiency, there's either a delay or a breakdown, and you never want delays or breakdowns in essential communication. And then I'm going to wrap this up as we step into the last part, which is exercise. This is not a talk about exercise. It's a talk about the role that nutrition has in men's health. I've taken a line right down the middle and surrounded that with this notion of the part that omega-3 plays. But I promise you now that if you find the way to bring exercise into your life as a regular feature, 3 to 4 times per week, and it can be any version you want, and you marry that to just a step up in your nutritional practices, if you cut back a little bit on the things you know you shouldn't have, and you increase on the things that you know you desperately need, and you marry that to a modest exercise behavior, you will transform your health, you will transform your quality of life. And as this is based on men's health, I promise you now, you will start to self-regulate your testosterone production and needs. You will start to boost and self-regulate your male reproductive needs. You will start to shift yourself away from the categories of risk when it comes to non-communicable disease. And like nothing else, the best meditation on the planet, bar none, the moment of being present, of being focused, of being in the moment, is exercise. 100% is the surefire go-to category for everybody. And on that note, I'm going to stop sharing the slides. We've covered a lot, but we've also just really touched the surface. So I'm aware of the fact that there's probably 5 million questions. I am happy to stick around and answer a few if you'd like to pick some up and read them out, Guril or Jackie or whoever wants to be the question meister.
Why?
I think you've been very clear, Colin, because we don't have that many questions. So I think everyone was just very busy listening to you. Let's go. Do you have any, Jackie?
I don't have a question, but I thought if you could have a quick look. I just wanted to mention that Colin will be live in his hometown of Liverpool on the 19th of September. We're very excited about this, and it's going to be about men's health again. So it's going to be more of this. So hopefully everything he didn't get in, and he'll repeat what he's done, but hopefully there'll be more of it, which is very exciting. There'll be Colin and panel guests, and it'll be a brilliant event. So that's Thursday, the 19th of September in Liverpool.
Putting it in my diary, as you say, Jackie. Thanks for that.
Okay.
What time is it? Just so everyone knows, I know.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock, people. The 19th of September.
And looking at all the comments, I'm sure we're going to invite you back to this this monthly webinar too, Colin. Also on the topic of men's health, we have a list of other things too, but men's health will sure be one of them if I look at the comments. If there's no other questions, then Jackie, do you you have anything to say?
No, just that was brilliant, comprehensive. I love, the whole mixing. I'm very keen to know about male fertility because working with fertility all the time, the men often don't listen, and the men often won't come and listen to any nutrition information or have, say, acupuncture. Actually, one question, sometimes it's really, really hard to get men to listen, and sometimes women can come across as a bit naggy or a bit going on. What would be a really good way to deliver this information to a man and they would listen?
If I figure it out, I'll do it, and I'll make myself a multi-millionaire. The problem, I think, to be honest with you, I think the problem we have, and you just kind of nailed it, is that sometimes this comes across and it can be a bit preachy. And I'm very mindful of that when it comes to anything health. I think I go around the world like bringing about interventions on everyone's life. You know, if I'm on a train and I see someone eating a pot noodle, like I say something to them. I don't. I never unsolicited mention what I do or anything to anyone. That what people do is none of my affair until they ask me. So I think particularly there's a male center point on this, which is, I know it's a bit of a stereotype, and stereotypes don't hold up when you examine them. But I think that this whole notion of it being preachy, and I think it's just a legacy and a culture of it'll be all right. I mean, that's just such a male default position. Like, oh, it's okay, it'll be all right. And I think the way to actually get it across, and I do more and more of it now, this is one of the reasons why. I mean, just for anyone who's still interested, when I hosted that event 2 weeks ago in London, the final session was mine. And believe it or not, the session they asked me to cover was mental health. So they asked me to do a session which was all about mental health, mental resilience, mental strength, for people working in the fitness industry. And the reason being is because of the environment.
Wordt geld verdiend, hè? Stadions helemaal propvol.
Yo, mute. Because of the environment I've been working in, I've got a fair amount of experience in it, I guess. And I think the reason why, when I reach people, or how I've reached people, I'm not saying I'm the best at it, is because I'm a bit of a typical man myself, aren't I? You know what I mean? I'm a bit sporty, I'm covered in tattoos, I've been in the military, you know, all those kind of typical archetypes that would typify a man, but I'm not at the same time, because I've got a very professional career. I'm like, you know, quite highly educated, all that kind of stuff, all that jazz. So I think that's how I reach people, but I don't think there's any one way. But I do think that what we need to get across to more people is that there is something they can do about it, and the fact is that they need to. And as much as I love Joe Rogan, they're not going to find many answers there.
Just before people leave here, or before we end this call, there's also a regional meeting in London this weekend. I hope you know about that, Colin. Saturday the 22nd.
I'm at that one.
Yeah, you are. So from 1 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. Everyone, free for everyone to join. Also with some other speakers.
I bet you can tell people what I'm talking about as well, can't you?
Let me see. Let me scroll. Actually, it's in the. No, actually, I can't. So.
There is
going to be a surprise for all of us. Show up, folks. It's going to be amazing.
There's been a question, if you want a question quickly.
Go on then.
I've got one of them says, can I assume your presentation that menopause drop in TST with age is not a genetic inevitability like menopause, but more to do with lifestyle choices?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for picking that up. don't get me wrong, there are some changes for sure. There are some age-related changes, but they're far more subtle. And I didn't. Thank you for picking that up, because this is an important thing, and I apologize to everyone who's left because we've lost a few. Is because actually there's a physiological window whereby there's a normalization where you shouldn't expect any type of change really that should have a dramatic impact. And that's really from the age of maturation around about 21 all the way up into about what we call early old age, which is approximately anywhere from 58 to 62. So there's a bit of a window. And then it's beyond that. Then there are pronounced age-related changes in these things at that stage. And that's a whole different talk. But the reality is that's not where the problem is. There's not many 60-year-old men going in the clinic and saying, we're trying to have a baby, and it's not happening. It's men who are in their 30s and 40s, and actually some in the late 20s is where it's happening. And it's also men who are, you know, mid to late 50s and actually early 50s who are having this notion of depleted testosterone, lack of testosterone availability, and not able to, you know, exercise effectively, dropping libido, all those kind of things. That's where it is, and that's within that area, and that's why it's a concern, because it should still be normalized.
So isn't anything else? Everyone's busy taking notes. Can you replace testosterone patches with something else? Nutrition, supplementation.
I think the evidence around testosterone patches, are we talking about clinically, are we talking about prescribed testosterone patches, or are we talking about over-the-counter supplementation testosterone patches?
I'm going to presume, because she doesn't actually say, I'm going to presume it's medically prescribed ones.
So the medically ones, that's typically given on a condition whereby the parameters are extremely low. And as I say to everyone in any kind of situation with any kind of long-term medication, is to maintain the medical treatment, but start to bring about the lifestyle changes. And in those kind of areas, I would estimate that way above 80% of people could transfer off. You got to bear in mind, and I don't mean to be sensational, but a lot of prescriptions these days are given off the notion that they actually know you won't do anything. That genuinely, and that sounds awful, doesn't it? But it's true. A lot of prescriptions are given off the fact that the reality is most people aren't going to transform their lifestyle, and this is going to be the way for them to cope and manage. And so there you go. It's a long-term strategy. And that's why it's still the minority where people are proactive, take it into their own hands, dietary modification, get more active, do more of the right things, and transform it for themselves. And so this notion that you have to take medication for the long term, it's only normalized because it's common, but we just make it less common and it won't be so normal.
Real, have you seen any others? Is there a direct effect on diabetes blood sugar? I'm not sure what that's.
Well, from omega-3. Omega-3 actually functions. We could get trapped here all night now. I know where we're going. But omega-3 functions as a prebiotic for sure. That's why most omega-3 supplements, it's one of the reasons why a lot of standard supplements don't work, because the gut gets first call. So you have a lower efficacy, low amount. The gut takes most of it. There's very little to function at a cellular level. Polyphenols are also prebiotic, and the gut makes use of them. And, you know, we're looking more and more at the database that we have and the mechanisms at play. And a huge part of the mechanism is the fact that we are addressing some of those glycemic and glycemic control factors with the balance oil, which is the polyphenol plus the omega-3, which can normalize that response. So yes, we're looking more at that, but it does for sure, yeah.
There was one other question that I saw. Dr. Robertson's expertise is extremely evident. Could he touch on some of his own criteria when evaluating the Enzino product line?
How do you mean? What do you mean?
Not sure.
I mean, I've done a lot of talks about. I mean, really, how you evaluate. I'm very quantitative. So you have scientists who are really qualitative, and I appreciate qualitative research. It's important, but that's to me is always the kind of the feel and the I hate using this term, so don't have a go at me for this, but it's always to me the kind of softer side of it. It's very important. It's as important, but it's the softer side of it. It's more subjective. Whereas I'm very much a hard scientist. I'm very quantitative. I like to measure things, and I like things like repeatability and reliability and validity, and I'm very much like hardwired that way. And so to me, when I came first of all to appraise Enzino, it was really to look at the functionality of it. You know, did the science back up the claims? And when you look at the functionality and how things are proposed to work, that was why the formulation of Extend was so impressive, because most multivitamins are rubbish because they just try and max out total amounts, and the body doesn't work that way. If only it did. And it's so when you look at it, you've got to start to consider, how does this function? Does it function like food, or is it going to increase circulating amounts sufficiently whilst priming or prompting the immune response or endocrine response to draw these things down? And there's a lot to consider in that, and that's really the guiding light that we have, even with regards to product development. Is like, can we really legitimately do these things? Does it work that way? What will be the functionality of the product? Because to just go, okay, we're just going to put this amount of nutrients in a formulation and sell it. That's what the vast majority of the industry does, and that's why the vast majority of the industry doesn't work. It's way more involved than that. You've got to start to consider, you know, you've got to start to think of oral microbiota, gut microbiota, digestive interactions. You've got to have an understanding with regards to circulating levels and the biochemistry of that, what happens. There's way more to it. And so that's how we appraise what we do, what we have, and what we're going to do. Takes a lot of grey matter, a lot of thinking time.
I found another question. Dr. Cole indicated good diet plays an influence in part on testosterone. Is there any correlation? That's not the right word. Any between intermittent fasting and the levels of testosterone?
No, there's a lot of mythology, and bear in mind, I'm not a proponent of it. Intermittent fasting can have its place, and I like tough stuff. I wrote about this in my book. I like tough things. Do hard stuff. Man, woman, beast. Do tough stuff. It's really good for you. Really good for you individually. Just lick the nettle, all that kind of stuff. And intermittent fasting has all the same measurable benefits as time restricted eating. So we get reprieve of the endocrine system, we get reprieve of the immune system, and we get reprieve of the digestive system. All of these, by reducing the metabolic window, all of these things, they have a positive effect, net effect. When you compare it to things like a calorie controlled diet, which I would discourage you from, you get a similar kind of outcome on weight management. And with regards to testosterone production, there's been some claims made, but none of it's been substantiated. None of it's been substantiated. But that to me makes sense, because there's no evidence that there's any kind of gastric influence or gastric load that suppresses testosterone. So it wouldn't make sense to me anyway.
Excellent. Excellent.
There is one more I found. Is the midlife crisis a part of this?
Buy a sports car. Yeah. Midlife crisis. You know what the problem with the midlife crisis is that we laugh about it, and it's a really serious thing, and it's a modern thing, because we are living longer on average. We're living longer on average. We've never been so well off, even the ones who aren't. Like a low income UK family lives like a duke or a prince 600 years ago, and a middle income UK family lives better than a king did. So when you look back historically, you look at Henry VIII and stuff, you live better than him. That's how living standards are. And despite what's going on in the world, it's never been so safe. We can access affluence quite easily on relative terms. And so we live longer. We have so much at our disposal. So much of life is distraction. And then we hit that age where we don't really know who we are anymore. The children are growing up. We've done the career stuff. We've bought the luxury couch and the big TV, and we've done all those kind of things. And we've been and took a selfie next to the Leaning Tower of Pizza, and we've done all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of like, okay, I still don't feel like the bucket's filled. And so then you go off and buy a sports car or have an affair, or I don't know. But I work with midlife crisis people. They decide to climb Everest. They decide to, you know, like row across the Atlantic. They do crazy things, and that's if they're reasonably healthy. And I think that the way we could cure the midlife crisis is to everyone buy into the idea, which I wholly do, that like I just don't buy into the notion that you're meant to have done anything by any point. Like, start your PhD when you're 70. Literally, you know, start doing martial arts in your late 60s. You know, write your novel when you're 80. When you're 20, start collecting stamps. I don't know, it just doesn't matter. And if you take that out of it, if you level the playing field and go, I can just start and do whatever I want at any point, then there's no such thing as midlife, because there's no midway. It's just the way, and you can do whatever you want. That's my approach to curing the midlife. And also, just stop looking at what other people have. You'll never be happy.
I think part of that question as well, she said, was, do the testosterone variations impact the midlife, or is it just something that happens because of social?
Well, of course it does, because dopamine drops, doesn't it? So because you get a decreased amplitude of dopamine. So if we look at men now who are more susceptible to midlife crisis, typically, but women have them as well. So they're inclined to go and have an affair, dopamine surge. They're inclined to go buy a fast car or motorbike, dopamine surge. They want to climb Everest, dopamine surge. So it's all of these kind of things, and this is like making up for a downfall in testosterone. The libido's low, so they blame it on everyone but themselves. So they think, right, what I need is like a 21-year-old stunner to get me libido kick-started again. So they look at all the wrong things. They look at all the wrong things. Like, yeah, run a marathon. No free dopamine. If you want dopamine, get off the couch, go and do some exercise. No free dopamine. If you all buy into the rule of discipline is destiny, just be disciplined, do the things you're meant to do, and no free dopamine. If you want a dopamine hit, it's not a chocolate bar, it's not an affair, it's not a fast car. Go for a run, go to the gym, do something like that. Earn your dopamine. Promise you, you're going to be happier, more content. Absolutely promise you. And I'm off now because I'm talking about stuff that I've got no qualification to talk about.
Thank you so much, Colin, for sharing all the things you've done today. Just before everyone leaves, read his book, Made to Move. You can find it. Where can you find it, Colin? Just Google it. Just Google it. Buy it.
Yeah, madetomove.com, is it? Or .co.uk. I think it's one of those two.
And then before everyone leaves, that's where I started. We're just going to promote the next webinar. That's going to be the 17th of July with Dr. Paul Clayton, and it's going to be all about the guts. So we're going to send out the promotion tomorrow and hope everyone will join us then. Thank you again, Colin, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much, folks. Stay well.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.